Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing another Sharks player review. And today we have the second member of the dreaded and infamous NBC line, Andrew Cogliano. Now, unlike Matt Nieto, who actually had a pretty decent history with the San Jose Sharks, some newer Sharks fans may not have remembered that he was actually drafted over 10 years ago by San Jose. Andrew Cogliano doesn't have anything of that nature. His history with the San Jose Sharks only extends back to last year, the offseason of the 2021 season, where he was signed by Doug Wilson and the San Jose Sharks to a one-year deal worth $1 million. And in fact, he didn't even finish out the 21-22 season with the Sharks because of the fact that he was traded at the trade deadline to the Colorado Avalanche, where, good for him, he managed to win a Stanley Cup, something he was not going to do with the San Jose Sharks this past season. Now, the reason I should once again bring up the fact that I did call his line, the infamous NBC line, him, Cogliano himself, Bonino, and Nieto. The reason I call it infamous, if you hadn't watched my Matt Nieto video, I'll go over it briefly here. The fact that they were playing together a ton this past season. For whatever reason, Bob Booner put these three players together very, very frequently. Cogliano's even strength ice time, he spent about 31% of it with those two other players, and that is even counting the ice time that he had with the Colorado Avalanche, which took about a quarter of the season. So the fact that that was still leading the way by such a wide margin is, very telling of how often they played together. And then on top of that, it was one of the worst lines, not just on the San Jose Sharks as a whole, which it was definitely leading the way there, but one of the worst lines in the entire league. So clearly not very good, and Cogliano obviously played a role in why that line was not very good. When it comes to his actual stats on the season, 56 games played, you might think that seems a little bit low because, of course, I should mention, like I said, he was traded to Colorado, and I'm not taking into account any of his games that he actually played with Colorado. That is extremely irrelevant to what he actually did with the San Jose Sharks prior to the deadline. And so 56 games played, 4 goals, 11 assists for 15 points. Honestly, a point total that is not too bad for a player like Andrew Cogliano. That puts him over 20 points in a full 82 game season, which for a fourth liner that was brought in to just sort of be a warm body in the lineup and potentially even be a healthy scratch sometimes, getting over 20 points is actually kind of decent, which was nice to see. But what wasn't nice to see is actually the next stat on the list, of which is of course his plus minus, a minus 16 with the San Jose Sharks. And like I mentioned in the Matt Nieto video, minus 10 of that came because he was playing with Bonino and Nieto. It was generally just a completely awful line for the San Jose Sharks, and the fact remains is that Cogliano was brought in. He was supposed to be a defensively responsible forward. He was supposed to be a guy who you could rely on, and Bob Booner, for whatever reason, decided to do exactly that for like 40 games or something crazy like that. And even though there was zero actual positive returns for that line, Cogliano didn't necessarily have a ton of offensive skill to his game, even though he ended up putting more points than I was expecting. It's kind of telling in and of itself, the fact that I'm impressed by the fact that he had over 20-point pace over a full 82 game season. That's not good for most players, and especially for a third liner, which Cogliano was played in many times this season. If your third liner was putting up 20 points, you're probably not very excited about that unless they're making up such an amazing defensive line for you. But the Sharks were not getting good defensive play. They weren't even getting average defensive play. They were getting completely awful defensive play, and you only accept completely awful defensive play if you're getting like 40 or 50 points out of a third line or something crazy like that. And of course, this line was providing none of that. So Cogliano, he wasn't brought in to score 20 points. I feel as though he would have still been rather average if he managed just like 10 or 12 points on the season, but actually kept up his side of the deal, which was to play good defensively and responsibly, and he just didn't do that. When it comes to his time on ice, 13 minutes and 12 seconds might seem slightly high, but remember, like I said, he was playing in a third line role for a good chunk of this season with the San Jose Sharks. On top of that, this is combined ice time with all situations. When it comes comes to just even strength ice time, he had about 11 minutes and 15 seconds, which was right near the bottom of most constant forwards for the San Jose Sharks. He was really only above a couple of players who frequently saw fourth line time, like Weatherby or Scott Reedy, and he even found himself behind very sort of infrequent type of players who only played a few games, like Bordelot or like William Eklund. When it comes to his shorthanded ice time, this is really where Cogliano actually stood out, with almost 2 minutes per game of shorthanded ice time. He was second on the team in terms of forwards for this particular stat, only a singular second behind Logan Couture. And you may look at that and say, well, doesn't that mean that he was a big part of the Sharks penalty kill? And on top of that, since the Sharks penalty kill was so successful this past season, that means Cogliano played a massive role. Yes, that can be technically true, but this is also why statistics in hockey can sometimes be a bit of a trap, because you look at a stat like shorthanded ice time and you immediately think, oh, well, since he played a lot, that means he was extremely reliable and he did a very good job of that, guaranteed. But that's not always the case. You might think that for a player like Logan Couture, and you might end up actually being right. But a high shorthanded ice time does show a reliability and a dependability from your coach, but it can also show the fact that sometimes you maybe had shifts that got extended because you couldn't clear the zone, right? The optimal shift that a coach wants to give a shorthanded player is probably like 30 seconds max. You want to be able to, be on the ice, keep the puck from the middle of the ice, and then get it down the ice so that you can go for a quick change and get the next shorthanded unit on. If you take a 1 minute, a 1.5 minute shorthanded shift, that is not a good thing. That is not necessarily something that a coach is going to go, yeah, that's my guy. That's something that they want to prevent as much as possible. And so a heightened shorthanded ice time could actually suggest that you're taking extended shifts because you and the rest of the players on the ice can't actually clear the puck out of the zone, which is not a positive and is actually kind of a big negative. If we take a look at another statistic for shorthanded, this is actually power play goals against per 60 minutes. If we were to actually take a look at a player like Matt Nieto, the last player I reviewed, he had just over 3 power play goals against per 60 minutes. If we take a look at Cogliano, his is at just over 5 power play goals against per 60 minutes. This isn't the worst on the San Jose Sharks. This isn't completely awful. Certainly not the worst thing in the world, but it is just going to show that just because he has an elevated shorthanded ice time stat doesn't necessarily mean that he is some sort of absolute amazing player when it comes to this particular facet of his game. He did a decent job of that. He did a pretty good job at that, but it wasn't anything elite in that way. And so when it comes to his grade, honestly, I was kind of flip-flopping up until the final moment. I thought I was going to go like with Matt Nieto and give him the grade of a C, where he was kind of just average, because his expectations, like Matt Nieto, coming into the season were extremely low. However, I feel as though Cogliano, I don't know what it was, but I was expecting slightly more from him than Matt Nieto, and I was extremely disappointed with his defensive output on the season. And so in the end, I've decided to give him just slightly below that C with the grade of a C-, a slight disappointment in my eyes. Class dismissed.